All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Welcome to the period of the week where we get to geek out, have some fun.
Definitely.
Now, I wanted to kick something off with this conversation as everybody's jumping in. Just, keep in mind format, no format, just throw any questions you have our way. We're happy to dive deep into things. I'm going to kick us off a little bit here. Because I've made some bold claims about AI coming to the software space, especially in Amazon, of course. One of the things I've mentioned quite a bit is listing optimization. I think it's a prime candidate for this type of, basically for where we're at with AI. The intelligence keeps increasing. I think the newest GPT model, the IQ is rated at like 120, 130-ish, and the previous one was like 70. So like we're making some big progress there. I do want to highlight, I'm going to share my screen here and show you guys this. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so Smart Scout's doing this, right? This is the first iteration, in my opinion, because I think what's going to happen is eventually this will just become passive. Right now, it's very active, and this is really geared towards private label sellers. Now, some wholesale sellers will do listing optimization if they're on listings long enough. If they're not, they should. But it's great. I think, here's like the before, here's the after. All the purple highlighted is like the search terms that it's including, right? Really, listing optimization is SEO. That's all it is. It's just SEO for Amazon. So what's really nice about this is they're actually doing what I've been talking about, just again at a much higher level. Eventually, I think what will happen is this will become more passive because more sellers will use it. Right? Like your resellers, if you're doing RAOA, you're not doing this because you're not on listings long enough. It's not worth the time and effort. The cost of doing this manually is too high. Now, using AI, the cost comes down, but it's still time consuming. So I think eventually what will occur is this will become more passive. And every time you jump onto a listing, it's just going to run this in the background, just self-optimizing, which is really cool. So I wanted to highlight, I'm not crazy. This is happening. Maybe at a slower rate than what I would like, but it is occurring nonetheless.
Yeah, it's interesting to see it start to kind of bleed into some of those everyday functions that we thought could be automated. And that's definitely one of them that we've talked about. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves or how that performs initially. And then like what other areas we've mentioned may start to see sort of the improvements or evolution, being able to have just that AI, whether it's assistant or just optimization performance involved.
Yeah, exactly. So super, super exciting stuff. All right. So as per usual, I'm going to throw a little banner up here so everybody is aware. Throw us your questions. We can geek out about anything here. Super open format. And we'll just have some fun with it. I'm having some fun with AI lately. Big surprise there. But I did I recorded a presentation for the Proven virtual summits, and it was kind of focusing on AI and like making it practical for sellers. And I really dove deep in things I've covered here, Perplexity to learn how to solve certain problems, right? Like you're at a point now as a seller where you don't really have to search through groups, ask a ton of questions, although that's still something you should do. For most things, you can just go to perplexity.com and ask the question. It's going to go through everything for you, give you the answers. You're all set. So very exciting. I'm trying to push the envelope on some of this stuff to get people thinking differently. Definitely, again, early stages, but it's coming fast. It's definitely coming fast. New models are getting released pretty much every 2 weeks to a week at this point, depending on how you want to measure it. But it's very exciting stuff right now.
What have you been playing around with AI wise? Have you gotten what was it? The orange, was it the rabbit or something? Did you get that?
The rabbit. Yep.
Running?
So I do have the rabbit, which is pretty cool. I don't use it as much. For me, I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. I really wanted to put money behind the project as a vote for like, hey, I want these kind of things to exist. I knew it was going to be a beta product. I play around with it every now and then, but not super frequently. There's a big meme when they first launched, like this should just be an app. I agree. But again, voting with your money helps push people to create versions that are better. And there's actually a company I'm on the wait list for right now called Nox, Nox, and they're basically building the rabbit, but on on the phone. So
That's
very bullish on it. A lot of things that I am waiting on is just taking forever, which is kind of how it works. So let's see. Magali, when will you have Walmart available as a marketplace? Thanks. Yeah. So we just got approved actually for a developer access. So we're starting to like kind of scope things out now. You kind of have to work a little bit more hands-on with their team, their development team, more so than on Amazon where they're just like, here's the docs, like go build whatever you need. So it's gonna be a little slower than what we would like. But what's nice is like with what we're working on kind of in stealth mode right now, it pairs in really nicely. So timing's actually really good. So should have that. I'm guessing realistically Q1 of next year is more realistic, but definitely a super high priority for us.
Yeah, I've been hearing more and more of that in chat, just folks having general success in the Walmart space. Not that they're totally ditching Amazon as a whole, but I think some of the initial observations have been like generally sales velocity is slower on Walmart, but you can get that margin to be a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Not too surprising, as I know we talk about like downward pressure on buy boxes due to the number of sellers in the space. So naturally with Walmart kind of getting a little bit more up and running and in the early stages of having kind of a seller community, it's not super surprising to hear those two main observations or initial results when folks are jumping into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. They're putting a lot of resources behind it, which I really appreciate. It's nice when a large company like that kicks off a new effort and really gets behind it to support it instead of just being like, oh, well, technically, yeah, you could be a seller, but like it's an afterthought. It seems like they're really making it a priority for scale, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I saw an article that basically Walmart's building like a Walmart campus, kind of like a Google campus, like a tech campus. So I think they're really trying to become more of a tech company. And I've mentioned this before. They've always been more tech advanced than what you would realize because you don't see it. Like one of the first corporations to have private satellites for beaming data for faster, connection. Mm-hmm. So a lot of stuff kind of behind the scenes that you don't really see. You don't really think of Walmart as a tech company, but they really are. And I think they're really starting to try to build a culture out there. Because I mean, listen, at this level of a company, when you're trying to acquire talent, you're competing with Amazon. You're competing with incredible options, incredible salaries, a lot of conveniences like the daycare stuff that they do, all kinds of nap pods and whatever. You do have to compete with those things, right? You're not just competing for customers, you're competing for talent at the same time too. And you really
Mm-hmm.
need the talent to be able to get the customers, building out what you need. So
definitely.
Yep. Higher margin and selling on beauty products, Amazon gated to everybody. Yeah. Great example, right? To me, I really think of Walmart as the Wild West, era of Amazon. It's early days. Things will become gated eventually. They will have to mature and be hit with all kinds of lawsuits like Amazon has been, which is really fun. See, the reseller support has been amazing as opposed to living in fear of being suspended on Amazon. LOL. Yeah, this is the thing, right? And I think this is where people are getting to, right? People are wanting to diversify their risk. We talk a lot about something called platform risk. Basically, if your business exists on top of a platform, that platform doesn't like you for whatever reason, you are always at risk in some way, shape, or form. No matter how great you are, there is always this potential risk of things changing for the negative. And going into the Walmart world now, as it's starting to kind of take off and grow, allows you to diversify a little bit easier. Previous diversification was mainly eBay. And to me, I don't think that's a good enough diversification. Granted, can you build a big business on eBay? Of course you can, but it's just fundamentally different. Most people are not shopping for new stuff on eBay. They're shopping for used collectibles, things of that nature. And so just the culture, the customer base is very different on eBay. I think it's a good thing for like used items. You get returns, sure. But Walmart is really starting to compete pretty heavily with Amazon. And that's a really, really great thing. See, Emmanuel, how's it going? Glad you're here. So I think this is the cool thing about this world is it's starting to fractionalize a little bit. It's been very much monopolistic, and I don't say that in like a negative way. It's just Amazon's crushed it, and they deserve their success. But you're having new marketplaces crop up, even niche specific marketplaces that you could begin to take advantage of on the side. Now, should you hardcore diversify? No, right? Like it's a lot more effort, a lot more data to analyze and figure out, okay, well, I still have limited capital. Where do I spend it? All this good stuff. The more you diversify your channels, the more headaches you're going to have. And so in some cases, very much worth it. But to a certain degree, I think it becomes a law of diminishing returns. It just, the complexity increases every single time you add a new one. So kind of look at your specific scenario or situation and ask yourself, well, how much capital do I have available? If I can open up a new channel and I'm not really going to take a hit on Amazon for doing that, it's probably okay. But also, are you maximizing Amazon? I think my big philosophy on diversification of channels is it's got to serve a good enough purpose, right? If you're doing it just to increase sales and you're not really capping out on Amazon, and most sellers are not capping out on Amazon's demand, it's probably not a good enough justification. Again, risk diversification, that's a whole different thing that I think is worth experimenting with, especially as these Section 3s continue to evolve. It's just a good fallback. Send me all my inventory, I'll get it sorted out, and then just go to the competition for a period of time. Hopefully that will actually hold Amazon a little bit more accountable and have them do those things less. I think last I looked, it was like 52% of sales on Amazon are third party. Now that's not factoring in brands and what percentage of those are brands versus true third party resellers. Hard to say, but I don't think they're really worried at this point about losing sellers, to be honest. I don't think it's hit that critical threshold. Eventually it could. And it would just kind of shock them to be like, oh, like our sellers are willing to go to Walmart. There's enough demand to support them. We need to do something different. That's how they're probably going to be thinking about this. So it's a good conversation. These are things you need to be thinking strategy wise pretty heavily. So.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, even if it's just 1/3 of that 52%, I mean, that's a little bit more than 15% of all their sellers being third party. Yeah. I think right now I have seen more folks kind of getting hit with that Section 3 and having their accounts paused or put on hold. My assumption there would be Amazon's probably being a little over aggressive, kind of covering themselves following the lawsuit. I think in July it was, where they got hit with, it was something like, was it like 1 million products in all sorts of different categories. Yeah. So not too surprising to see them kind of be a little over aggressive and protect themselves there. But as Walmart grows, as people begin to diversify or even leave Amazon altogether, I would be surprised to see Amazon pull back or make some adjustments to try and support the seller community a little bit more. I know they don't do a whole ton in that area right now, just knowing that they have a little bit of, I won't say a chokehold on the space anymore, but they have an overwhelming majority of third-party sellers already within their ecosystem. So until they start to lose a big chunk of those folks, I don't think we'll see much change on their end. But
yeah,
Walmart could grow faster than we expect, and they could really support that community really well, in which case we might see Amazon respond a little bit sooner.
Yeah. So I know you're working on, hold on. So many, sorry, man, questions because I started Aura 10 days ago, loving it. Should I have a max price on my strategy or leave it blank? Love the questions. Keep the questions coming. This is what we're here for. All the questions, brain dump them. Okay, so should you have a max price on my strategy or leave it blank? Okay, it depends. So if you're using a role-based strategy, I tend to not recommend you automatically calculate the max price in the strategy, because it's doing it based on cost, and that's not really like the proper way to do it. It's going to create some issues, just because the cost relative to the price is very different. There's a lot of variance there. So in those cases, I would actually recommend you manually set those at the listing level. However, if you're using Maven will automatically do that for you. And yes, you should just say, do it for me. I don't need to worry about it, because being dynamic there is far greater of an advantage than manually setting it. But Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
No, I would agree with that. And Maven will kind of find that optimal max price for you, and that will fluctuate depending on the competitive landscape and the data it observes on that specific listing. But I really generally encourage folks. I mean, the only thing required in Aura is to have a min price and assigned strategy, and for repricing to be on in order for it to be effective. though rare, having a max price can kind of cap your performance. Doesn't happen super often, but it can happen. So just for that reason,
Yeah.
I typically recommend not having a max price set, or having Maven kind of auto calculate that. The one exception to that rule would be is if you do go out of stock on Maven and on rules based strategies, the default is to go to your max price. We typically do recommend going to your max price when you go out of stock for a number of reasons, but mostly because when you have a better shipping window, you're going to perform better, and Amazon will likely take that into account when determining who's going to win the buy box on your specific listing. So that would be the only reason to go to your max price. Just make sure that you have kind of the best performance and chance when you have items in stock. But other than that, I would generally say you can leave it blank unless you're worried about selling a lot of units below a margin that you'd like when you don't actually have those items in stock.
Yeah. I do go out of stock kind of often. Got it. Nice. Let's see, John here, for small and light items where fees might be higher, just over $9.99 than at or under $9.99, should we add a max price to avoid the $10 to $12 range when repricing? No, because we actually do this for you, which is nice. So we call these reduced profit ranges. We actually have a help desk article at help.goer.com that explains this. If we're automatically calculating mins, maxes, and of course the repricing itself, it's factoring those things in. So it should avoid those entirely. So you shouldn't have to really think about it. This is one of those things in software where it's very important, but you shouldn't as the end user have to think about it. We should just do it for you because it's objectively the right thing to do. So don't worry about that. Don't override anything like that. The system's going to take care of it. You really don't want to add too many restrictions or limitations that could cause second order negative consequences, meaning like there's just too many limitations. So John, don't worry about that. We'll handle it for you. But Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
No, I would agree that we did make that update a few months ago now. So all those fees should be calculated properly. If you see something that may seem off, there may be an updated structure on Amazon's end. Sometimes those go into a plate or come into effect automatically for us. Sometimes we do have to do a little manual work on our end for that. So if you see that, definitely feel free to send it our way via the support chat. We'll take a closer look. And since it automatically avoids that range as well, there may be a couple instances where your repricing may seem off due to your strategy. That's going to be because we're avoiding that specific profit range. So if you see that, maybe check on if that would be within where the range would be reduced. But like I said, if you see anything that seems off, definitely feel free to send it to us and we can take a deeper dive for you.
Yeah. See, Jesus, are these recorded? They are. So if you go to goer.com/office hours, all one word, office hours, all the pre-recordings are there at the bottom. So you can actually go back and rewatch all of them, which is great. Let's see, not using Maven yet. Can you give me a brief speech of the advantages of using it instead of creating my own strategies? Yes. So good way to think about this. Your rules-based strategies, I don't care what company we're talking about, has anywhere from 15 to 30 settings that you as the individual user have to set and create. Now, granted, we help with this quite a bit. Casey and Finn do. Maven has one, right? So what we're trying to do is say, how do we increase the complexity? So basically, how many variables are we looking at, increase performance and reduce the amount of complexity for you as the end user, right? So that one setting. So the way to think about Maven, it's finding the balance between sales velocity and profitability. These are the only two levers you have to play with, but they counter one another, right? So if you want to liquidate, what happens? Your sales velocity goes up, your profitability goes down, right? And what tends to happen is when you first come into stock, you want to be a little bit more conservative. What's interesting is most sellers tend to be a little too conservative in a lot of cases, right? So what we try to do is say, let's find the balance. We call this balance the optimal price. It's an actual equation. And this optimal balance can change, right? The optimal price itself can fluctuate. So what's interesting about that is if you think about a listing from an economics standpoint, when you have an increased number of competitors, you have a downward pressure on the price. So what's interesting is the optimal price tends to be slightly higher than the buy box, which kind of just rationally makes sense now. So what we do is we say, okay, well, we know where the optimal price is. Let's understand the competitor. So we know where we want to go, but we need to know what's true now so we can close the gap. And so we'll study your competition and say, okay, well, if I do X, what does competitor A, B, and C do in response to me? So I kind of understand their behavior. So I can take these as inputs and say, great, what what price changes do I need to make to close that gap? Because ideally, you're not measuring the success of your repricing tool based on my sales went up or my buy box ownership percentage went up. Those sound great, but the reality is there's a give and take there, and very hackable. If I lower your prices by 20%, you'll get both of those outcomes, but you're not really going to be happy because you're now trading profit margin for those things. So instead, we want to say, we measure success based on you and ideally the buy box, or at the optimal price as often as possible. If we can do that, we're good. So what you'll notice in a lot of cases, because again, that downward pressure is if you switch everything over to Maven, and we've done this with a number of large accounts, you will tend to see a pullback in sales velocity, just a little bit, and then an increase in margin and profit margin. That's the balance. Now, in some cases, it can be certainly the inverse, right? Somebody's way too conservative and they go from really high profit margin and hardly any velocity to way more velocity and less profit margin. But again, they're balanced. That's good. So the upside of using Maven versus creating your own strategies is, one, convenience, which is amazing. And two, it's factoring in far more data than you as a seller even have access to, right? The amount of data we have access to via the APIs developers is much greater than what you have access to. And let's be frank, even if you did have access to all the raw data, you couldn't process it fast enough. Like already you can't reprice manually and keep up. So what we're doing is pairing that complexity increase with speed, right? So when you pair that with Hyperdrive, we're able to react much faster and more strategic. That's like a good way to kind of think about it. So Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything I would mention. Like you mentioned, I mean, Maven being more focused on the margin side of things, it's not going to specifically target the buy box. So I generally recommend, if you are looking to maximize margin or you just have inventory that's shipped in, start with Maven, see how it performs, and then you can adjust most likely to our buy box strategy if you're trying to focus on a little bit more sales velocity or things like that. But if your main goal is to just target and win the buy box, you won't want to use Maven. That's not what it's designed for. You'll want to default to that buy box strategy. And as a note, if you do go to build that buy box strategy, the pre-configured settings in that strategy, when you build it within your platform or your account rather, those are our recommended settings for the best performance and maximizing both buy box share and margin in the buy box. The one setting you'll want to check and make sure is in line or change is going to be that min and max section. But otherwise, that is already pre-configured with what we see tends to provide the best performance there.
Yeah. And I see some people on Twitter saying like, oh, Maven's not getting me a ton of the buy box. Correct. That, because keep in mind, that's not the way you're measuring success, right? When somebody is on Twitter and they're saying, oh, I have 80% buy box ownership, it sounds nice, right? It's a nice kind of like, I'm crushing it. But really what you're doing is you're just trading profit margin for that. And so I would tend to argue you're actually missing out and not realizing it, which is its own problem. Let's see, I prefer profit margin, especially because I sell a lot of beauty products that are discontinued and therefore not much competition. So in that case, Maven's probably going to work really, really well for you, which is awesome. Yeah, it sounds like Maven is for me then. Exactly. That's exactly it, right? Now, that's not to say that Maven can't work on highly competitive, aggressive listings. It certainly can. But there are cases where you yourself need to be more aggressive because you need to move inventory much faster. Maybe it's becoming stale, you bought too much, what have you. In those cases, I would fall back to like a buy box targeting strategy like Casey was talking about. So there's definitely still room for rule-based strategies. This is why we haven't gone pure AI and that's it. In my idealized fantasy life, yes, it would just be one AI model. We'd just be like, throw everything at it. We're not there yet. I think it's going to be a number of years before any company is. But having that starting point with Maven and then saying, okay, cool, I actually want to move this a little bit faster for whatever reason, I'm going to fall back to that buy box targeting strategy. That's okay too.
Yeah, and we're working on providing more instead of just like help docs in terms of how to do things in the platform. Finn and I are working on providing more why or more just informational / educational tips and tricks around the space. One thing that he's working on is publishing an article around the 3 phases of repricing. So essentially talking about right when that inventory comes in, start with Maven to try and maximize that margin. Once it's been there for a few weeks, you maybe want to pick up that sales velocity, going to that buy box strategy. So that would be phase 2. And then eventually, like Dylan said, maybe you made a bad buy or you have too many units of stock or of inventory in stock rather. That's when you may switch to a liquidation strategy to just try and move that and recoup the capital that you spent there. So we'll be publishing that within the next week, I would say max 2 weeks, so that's just a good resource for you folks. But that's one way to kind of look at the different phases of your inventory and how to reprice it most effectively. Obviously, that does change based on your specific goals, but that tends to be a good setup for most folks that I work with, having some sort of balance between Maven and then rules-based strategies as well.
Yeah, exactly. I did a webinar recording with one of our partners this morning, and this question came up, what strategies should I have? Like that everybody should have. And I basically broke down like the first 2 we just mentioned, Maven, buy box targeting, and then that third is really a liquidation strategy, right? You're just like, I need to get my capital back. I'm willing to break even, maybe even lose some money to get my capital back. If you have those 3, it covers like 90% of the cases, in my opinion. But there's always going to be some exceptions. Like Casey, I'm sure you see these daily at this point of just, there's a weird listing. It's like, great, we need to build a strategy just for that one listing. But what's nice about the way we operate is like, you don't have to figure all that stuff out yourself. Like you can literally come into support and be like, hey, I have this weird listing. Here's the SKU. Help me. If you just said that, we could probably jump in and tell you exactly what to do, and we'll probably just build a strategy for you anyways.
Yeah, like you said, those 3 strategies cover 90-95%, and then the extra 10-5% would probably be specific competition related if you're only wanting to compete with FBA offers or MFN offers, depending on your own fulfillment type. That's where that customization and kind of flexibility in those strategies comes into play a bit more.
Exactly. Yep. Great questions, by the way. Keep these coming. These are fantastic. Magali, brain dump on us. This is good stuff. So, and welcome to Aura. 10 days in. That's exciting. So, see, do you know how Amazon calculates a max price for a product? I ask because when I set up max price on my strategy, my max level tends to go super high, and then it will trigger Amazon fair pricing rules and changes my product to inactive. I read somewhere it was 6x the average price, but seems to be much lower than that. I don't have a exact calculation because it does depend. Some listings will have like competitor pricing, like Target, Walmart, whatever. In our testing, I think it was only like 20% of listings included that. So if that's there, and again, you won't be able to see that. That's via the API. That will take effect. Sometimes you just have no idea, and it changes, right? What Amazon considers too high today could be very different tomorrow. And this is why we like that dynamic max, right? Because we're able to say, okay, well, let's test the waters. If it gets suppressed at 35, let's factor that in. But if the buy box goes to 37 tomorrow, we can stop looking at that now, right? That's the upside there. And this is where that complexity conversation kind of circles back, right? There's too many things that are seemingly random, and there is no like set rules. That's what's kind of frustrating about what we do. And so you have to build something that can kind of factor in that randomness a little bit and understand, okay, well, we know it could be one of these like 5 or 6 things, but they're not always present. So let's look for them. And when they're there, we'll factor them in. And when they're not, we'll fall back on something else. So there's kind of like a hierarchy that we can follow. But there is no like exact calculation. It used to be if you were 2% below FBA and you're a merchant fulfill, you'd get the buy box. And then that was true, but then it started to change. And then you could be 2% above FBA because it's COVID, and then that changed. And so there's a lot of, kind of anecdotes in our community. Some are very much real. Other ones, it's like, it's a good guess, but like nobody actually knows. And what's the sample size? Whenever I hear people talking about their data, I go, that's great, but your sample relative to all of Amazon is much, much smaller than you think it is. So it's hard to take that data and kind of extrapolate it out to every seller, right? You just can't do that, especially with sellers that have 100 listings. It's like you're a fraction of a percentage point in the pool, so to speak. So hard question to answer. If you give me an exact listing, I could probably tell you, but that's about it. But again, it changes, moment by moment in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and similar to their algorithm for calculating the buy box winner, that max price policy algorithm, if you will, isn't public. So we really don't know. And like Dylan said, it does vary significantly from one listing to another. I know in an office hours a few weeks ago, someone mentioned that if you go to your inactive listings in Seller Central, any of those that have that violating fair price policy, if you plug in, and I don't exactly quote me on this, but I believe they said you can or start testing max prices in that screen. And when you enter a max price that's considered acceptable, that notification will go away. So I would recommend trying to start there. But worst case, you may just want to lower your max by a few dollars, reactivate it, and then if it gets deactivated again, kind of continuing working down that way. Unfortunately, don't have a better recommendation or fix there. But trying to plug in those different max prices and see if that notification goes away before reactivating was one workaround, if you will, that another user found.
Yeah. Yeah. And keep in mind to avoid setting mins and maxes in Seller Central always. They really don't serve a purpose outside of they will guaranteed make your listing inactive. We don't look at them. We don't speak to one another in that way. I have a tweet scheduled, I think, for later this afternoon, basically talking about this. Like, you should really set your mins and maxes where they're being used. Because Amazon's not using them. They're not saying, cool, we're going to keep you, but we're going to manipulate your price, blah, blah, blah. They're just saying, if you go above this or below this, we will deactivate your listing. Not great, right? So you can avoid 80 to 90% of the problems there by just not having those at all. Now that's not going to eliminate 100% because you still have the fair pricing policy stuff. But again, that's not every listing. That's like 20%. That might have gone up since we last looked at it. It could be closer to 30, maybe even 40% at this point. I'd have to take a look. But doing that alone will eliminate a lot of the headaches for sure. And I used to be very strict when I was a seller. Every single one had it. And then started a repricing company, was like, oh, no, wrong way to do that. And because, again, you want your mins and maxes to be dynamic. As fees change, as your costs change, so should your mins. And again, on the dynamic max side, maxes have nothing to do with your costs. It has everything to do with what is realistic in the data on that particular listing at any given moment. That's why we calculate them on the fly. So we don't just say once a day we look. We say every single time a price change notification comes to us, we're going to rethink that and say, is that still correct? We may increase it, we may decrease it, we may hold it steady. And because the market is fluctuating so fast in real time on everything, you really want to be as dynamic as you can be. Anytime people want to do things manually in this way, I tend to push against that just because things fluctuate so fast. See, I hate that when I used Amazon Repricer, it would set my min price for me. And then even after stopping using the repricer, the min price stayed on the listing. Yeah, kind of frustrating. I did the same thing, which is why I had them. So I remember trying the Amazon Automate pricing, realized it only takes your price down, which is kind of frustrating. It's very fast, which is great, but not really in the direction you want to go all the time. So kind of frustrating. If you can remove them, awesome. I would definitely urge you to do that. They don't necessarily allow you to remove them all the time. Even if you can lower them, that's still better. Even if you can take them as low as you can, if you can't remove them, that's still giving more range for us to do what we need to do for your account. Some things should be easy that are not. See, how does Maven handle pricing on an ASIN if the only offers on them are Aura members using Maven? Love this question. I have to get academic for a second and say, holding all else equal, what will occur is basically everyone will go to the optimal price and fluctuate with the optimal price as it itself fluctuates. The reality, though, is every seller is kind of different. So while they're using the same model, they do have different costs. They have different mins. They may be setting their maxes manually in some cases. That's definitely possible. So, it's one of those, it's hard to answer because I've yet to really see it happen in the wild. We definitely have a lot of cases where there's multiple Aura users on a listing. But there's almost always one extra competitor who's not using Aura and or Maven that just throws a wrench in the whole thing. So it really just depends is the real answer. But again, in an academic sense, what would occur is everybody would go to the optimal price, rotate through the buy box, crush it together, and be fine. So this is why you should tell all your friends to use Aura and Maven so you can crush it together. Because, it's funny. I speak to a lot of sellers and they'll say, oh, well, we all buy together, right? We share bolos and we compete on the same price or on the same listings and products. Is there a strategy we can put together that would allow us to basically not compete with one another? Yeah, the answer is Maven, right? But again, if there's one third party in there that's not following suit, who knows how that could go? It really depends on what that person's doing, what their behaviors are, what their strategy is, if they have one. So it really just depends.
Yeah, and like we said, Maven doesn't specifically target the buy box, but that being said, buy box data, such as when it's suppressed, when it's active, the winner of the buy box, volume of sales in the buy box, all of that data does inform Maven's decisions. So that's like another element that Maven has to consider. If you are, or if there was, let's say 4 sellers on a listing, they're all using Maven. I really don't know where it would go, but I do believe Dylan would know more than me. So I think that optimal price would kind of be where everyone ends up. And, fluctuating costs may mean a different optimal price for a couple different people. But what I'll actually do, we do have a help doc around what Maven does in various scenarios. In this specific example, we don't have a help doc for when it's all folks using Maven on the listing. But I'll post that in the chat shortly, and that'll kind of just inform you folks on a couple typical scenarios that'll be happening on a listing and how Maven will perform in response to those. So let me just paste that in the chat for you folks here.
Awesome. And one thing to note too, Aura is not designed to know that other sellers are on a listing are also using Aura. That's a very intentional decision. It keeps privacy at the forefront. It also kind of protects us from any, potential price fixing kind of allegations, because that's a real thing we have to consider. So it will act independent, but if acting independent generates the same outcome, that's a different story. When we first launched Aura in 2018, even before Maven, of course, everybody asked the same question. Well, what if we're all using Aura? I don't know. It depends, right? What's your strategy? What's happening? Some people might want to be more aggressive than you are. Some people are willing to break even and you're not. Every possibility will occur, right? Just sheer sample size and variance and what things could be. I'd love to get to a world where we could be kind of sentient, but I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon. But I love this question, right? Because it's interesting to see that our users are kind of thinking through the same lens we are in a lot of cases. But we really isolate things not only to your account, but to each individual listing. It's really hard to generalize out in a lot of cases. The data variance is just too high there. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Heard about taking a break from repricing every day at night. Is the workflow menu option? Can you explain a bit more about workflows? Okay, yeah. So what a lot of people do is they will basically take their pricing to their max or 30% above the buy box at some cadence. If you're using rule-based, I think it's a great strategy. And workflows is really, if you're familiar with Zapier or Make.com, it's really like a set of automated rules, right? You have trigger events and then you have actions it can take. So all you would do is you would say at this frequency, that's the event, for whatever set of filters. It could be, for only listings using strategy A, take my price 30% above the buy box and hold it there for an hour. That works really great for rule-based. With Maven, we take a different approach. So the cadence problem is you don't know that doing it at 8 p.m. is objectively the best time to do it. So you run the risk of missing out on sales because you did that. So it looks nice. All your prices went up, but you're getting no sales, right? Again, you have the sales velocity and profitability problem. So what you're doing is you're basically pumping up the profitability or the potential profitability and potentially lowering the sales velocity. So even if you did it at a higher cadence, right? Let's say you do it once an hour and you do it for 10 minutes. Okay, cool. You're probably hitting more of the ideal times, but you're also potentially hitting evenly the same number of bad times. So with Maven, it's going to do it behaviorally. It's going to understand, is now the right time to raise my price? So it could happen no times because it actually never was a good time. Could happen once an hour. Could happen every 10 minutes. It really depends. And again, all these things we're talking about are complexities, right? These are all the things that like we've watched our users try and hack together. And what we did is we said, well, how do we take that concept and remove the friction of doing these things, but increase the performance of doing those things? So we take a behavioral approach, right? Again, when is the right time to do this? Is it now? Is it in 10 minutes? How often? All these different things. So we will do that for you, but in a different way. So we're not just going to say every 15 minutes, spike it. I don't know if that's good, right? Where do I spike it to, right? So Maven, using that optimal price, will understand when's the right time to raise me to the optimal price. Sometimes you shouldn't be at the optimal price because it's slightly too high. There's too much competition pushing the price down. Even if I try to pull it up, I'm not going to. So why waste the effort, right? So again, this is what's really nice about using Maven is we're taking all that complexity, abstracting it away from you as the end user, saying we'll handle that and we'll handle it in a higher performant way. You just go focus on sourcing because that's where you make the money. But it's a great question. I like these kinds of questions because it lets me know that you're thinking through the strategy of things and you're picking up these tidbits just like we are. So, oh yeah. And Casey just threw in go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we do have a help doc around pausing your listings at a specific time. Typically, I recommend pausing them for 15 minutes. That's enough time for all of your listings to kind of go to that max. Obviously, you can keep them paused for longer. Some folks will pause them for a couple hours, whatever you'd like there. Typically, if you're looking for the best time to pause them, if you are just selling in the US, I kind of have the, ideology, or I have the theory rather.
Philosophy. Framework.
Yeah, philosophy. There we go. I think that pausing anywhere between 1:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. PST is a good time. Obviously, with the 3-hour difference, that kind of would be when most people across the country are sleeping and probably not shopping online. So anywhere in that time window is what I recommend. And it will default to your specific time zone. So if you're on the East Coast and you set that time in that that workflow rather, that'll be based on EST, West Coast PST as well. So just kind of my general recommendation there, but that doc will help you get set up if you're trying to set up that workflow as well.
Yeah. Let's see. I know this might be documented somewhere in the help files, but could you recap how often Maven tries different approaches and tests various scenarios? Also, does the AI continue this process indefinitely, or does it stop once it finds an optimal strategy until new competition arises? So no, it is very dynamic. And a good illustration of this is when we're studying your competition, right? Let's say Casey and I are competitors on a listing. If he continues to match me, I know his behavior, right? So I know if I can pull a buy box up for a short period of time, he'll probably follow suit and we can crush it together. However, seller's behavior over time will change itself. So in a week's time, he might reprice 2 cents below me because now he's becoming more aggressive. He wants to move inventory faster, what have you. So we'll intentionally forget that behavior and attempt to relearn it as it's changing. So that's one way. In terms of like pulling the buy box up, we have a cool strategy that gets deployed, but it's when it gets deployed that matters. So another example here is like, let's say we're trying to grab the buy box, right? And then again, me and Casey, I'm the one using Maven, trying to grab it from him. I reprice, I match him. I don't get a rotation, or he reprices below me by a penny. I say, okay, cool. He's going to be aggressive. I'll be a little bit more aggressive as well. I'll go 1 penny below him. But let's say I don't pull the buy box. That's a good data point. So now let's try 2 pennies. Now let's try 4, right? We'll continue that thought process until eventually we find what works against him. Now, if a third competitor jumps on that listing and I can be 1 penny below them and pull the buy box, that's a different story, right? So we're really isolating each relationship to understand what do we need to do depending on who we are competing with, and we'll retest that over time as well. So we're not really jumping on learning and then just saying this is what it is. You can't do that. You're really making something concrete that shouldn't be. So we do have frequencies of which we will retest certain things to really understand what's changed here. But for the most part, a lot of this stuff is real time. In terms of like the learning phase, if you will, we don't really call it that, but I'm going to call it the learning phase. It really depends on each listing, right? If a listing doesn't have a whole lot of activity, it could take a few days to really understand it, because you need enough data through the experimentation to understand what really works and what doesn't. So that could take a little bit of time. On average, I would say it's probably like an hour, maybe a little bit more. Casey, correct me if you've seen something different. It really just depends though. But like if there's enough activity and competitors on a listing, it doesn't take that long. It could take a few hours, if that.
Yeah, it is all competition and listing landscape relevant, if you will, or based. I've seen Maven kind of optimize within, a couple hours to like a day. And that would be on a listing where there's, a lot of competitors, a lot of different pricing activity. Just the more activity on a listing, the quicker it's going to be able to observe, hey, with this price change, this is how all of these competitors responded, and in turn, how we should respond. If you're, the only seller on a listing using Maven, it really can only observe your own performance and your own movements. Yeah. So it'll kind of test for specific, sales and velocity there. Generally, I recommend assigning Maven and letting it run on a listing for 4 to 5 days. It won't take that long to learn and optimize, but in about that 5 day to 1 week mark is where you can assess, all right, is Maven going to work well on this listing? Should I give it a few more days, or should I maybe adjust to a rules-based strategy where I know exactly how it's going to perform against certain competition here?
Yeah. See, I should have added when it's a new item without significant history. Okay, so this really depends. Do you mean new item as in new to your catalog, or it's a new listing entirely? Either way, for the most part, that shouldn't matter, because we can't pull historical data on your competition, right? There's no way to really do that without scraping everybody, which is just an insane scale of problem. Because again, it's not really like, the issue is not what's been true, it's what is true, right? And I think that's where the dynamicness really starts to shine. Can you take some historical data and kind of plot things out? You could. And really, this is what private label repricing does. So if you look at something like a Prophecy, they cater to private label brands. You have to have 3 months of sales data before they can work with you, last I was told. Because the way they're repricing is very different. They're not looking at competition on a listing because there is no competition. They're looking at things like elasticity, right? If I raise my price by 20%, what does that do to my sales velocity? And they're plotting that per SKU. So by coming into that software with 3 months of data, that's plenty enough to really understand what's the variance here and like what's realistic and what have you tried and haven't tried. So there is definitely a case for that, but for resellers, it's less the case. Like, you're really not going to like plot out the economic variables of a listing for resellers and be able to really use it, in my opinion. Now we will look at certain things when you're actively on a listing, but again, there's also certain things that we actually can't get unless one of our sellers is on the listing, because the way you're pulling data is you're pulling it through the connection of that person's marketplace, right? We can't just hook up to you have to authenticate with us for a reason, right? I can't just grab data for any seller. You have to authenticate and say, I'm giving them permission to pull my data and pull data through me. So that's where there's some limitations. That's why a lot of companies like Keepa, they build web scrapers. That's how they get their data. They just go out, crawl all the links and say, cool, here's what I'm saying. And then they'll circle back to it and be like, cool, what changed? Okay, cool. The price has changed. Right. But they're doing that with web scrapers, which is a very different technology, which, we talk about all the time. Like, it'd be awesome to build our own, because we could basically enrich more data. The issue with web scraping is, one, it's a very scaled problem, meaning it's a lot to do. It's got to be hyper efficient. And the data you're pulling in, we process a ton of data, is dramatically high. So you got to make sure like that data is usable, useful, all that good stuff. So yeah, you won't really need significant history.
Yeah. And I guess kind of building off of that question, one example would be is if you have Maven assigned to a listing and it goes out of stock, once it comes back in stock, by default, Aura won't issue price updates to listings that are out of stock, but Maven will use its observed data from before you went out of stock to continue to inform its pricing decisions moving forward. So it'll essentially use all of the historical data that it's observed when assigned to a listing, but it's not able to backtrack to any time before Maven was assigned to that specific listing.
Mm-hmm. And this is mainly for like the dynamic max, right? Like that's where the historical data does come into play and does help. But we can only really start to get that when you jump on, like when you jump on a listing, that's when we're able to actually start pulling that stuff. Otherwise we'd have to pull everything for everything, which again, would love to do. And like, that's definitely something I want to do. But definitely going to take much longer, for sure. Great question though. I really like that question.
Yeah. A lot of good questions today.
Yeah. I like that we're diving into like some of the more like strategic concepts with Maven and stuff like that. So
definitely.
So VM, I appreciate the questions, and Magali has been great. Keep those flowing too. I know we got about 10 minutes left here. Happy to, again, open format, whatever questions you guys have, could be repricing related or related, could be just selling related. Happy to jump deep into any rabbit holes you guys have. And appreciate everybody making the time too. I made a tweet earlier today that was like, for the RA sellers in the South, prepare, winter is finally coming, so you won't be sweating to death doing RA. I remember, man, like doing RA when I first got started, especially in Florida. Oh my gosh, like during summer, you're just drenched. It's insane. Sourcing in winter is definitely, that's nice. I feel like you're just able to source 20% more.
Yeah, you just don't get drained as quickly,
Yeah. And I'm seeing more people try to pull up different software on their Teslas. I was like, now we're talking. Now we're talking. Why can't you list your products when you leave the store, put full self-driving onto your next location, to your next RA store, like while it's driving itself, you're creating listings, like that's great. See, I'm in Miami. I know what you mean. You get it. Yes, it is very, very hot and humid. Are you expanding to other apps and features other than Repricer? I can't state anything yet. We are working on a stealth project right now. Hopefully going into a beta phase mid-November. So that will be private beta at first. We'll then roll that out to Aura users and then go public. So we do have some cool stuff in the works. Nothing I can talk about at this period of time. But yes, we have some cool stuff coming your way.
Yeah, short answer, yes.
Yeah, I'm very excited and I can't talk about it publicly yet. So I have to hold myself back, and I'm not good at doing that because I just want to, I want to spill the tea always. I get too pumped and passionate and excited. So
yeah, I was always good at keeping secrets. So I'm able to lock the vault a little bit.
I'm good with secrets, but when it's like something you're that excited about, you're like, oh my gosh, that's where my ADD comes in.
Yeah,
I'm like, but I'm excited. My tism's showing. So let's see. John, I'm on a few listings that sell 10K plus units per month with 20 plus other sellers. Is the best strategy still to use Maven? I'm going to do my fallback here. It depends. What I would say though, is I would start with Maven first. See if you're getting good enough performance there for what you want. Most of the time that will be true. For ones where you want it to be more aggressive, that's when you would fall back to a role-based strategy. Maven is not designed for everything. Be super transparent about that. But it's going to work majority of the time really well. The thing to keep in mind, though, if you're testing Maven coming from a rule-based strategy, your min prices matter more than you think, but not in the way you think. So let's say you're used to setting your mins at 30% ROI with a rule-based strategy. Fantastic. I would urge you to not do that with Maven. I would urge you to actually cut that in half, which sounds scary, but keep in mind it's not designed to tank your listings like other competitors, to be friendly. Instead, though, what it's doing is it's giving it more range to do what it needs to do, right? It's able to get more data. It's able to test more things. And keep in mind, it's trying to pull the buy box up, right? I've tested this when we went into beta. We had a seller doing like 300K a month, moved 100% of everything to Maven in like one day. I was like, awesome. He's like, not seeing great performance. Not awesome. So I dove into the account and realized, oh, it doesn't have enough range here, right, to do what it needs to do. It's a different perspective you have to have when you're switching over to AI. And so I said, you know, let's cut it in half. Let's take it down to that 15% ROI, and that should increase performance. And lo and behold, it did. So just keep that in mind. If you're wanting to move large amounts of your listings over to Maven kind of in one fell swoop, do consider that first and foremost. So whenever you're troubleshooting Maven, so to speak, here's how I think about it. First, look at your min values. Those probably need to be cut in half first and foremost. If you've done that and still not seeing amazing results, then that's when I would start to look at, okay, well, for those particular listings, I would then look at a buy box targeting strategy. Because again, there are listings where you want to be more aggressive, where you care a little bit more about velocity than you do profit margin. And that's okay too, right? What we're not trying to say is you should only care about these things. You should only ever be at the optimal price. That's not always true. There are cases when you need to liquidate things. There are cases when you need to be more aggressive. So just keep that in mind, and feel free to use support. You know, chat with Casey, be like, hey, here are the listings I'm thinking about moving over. Is there anything that seems obvious that I should look at before I make that transition? We can take a look and just kind of give you a little vote of confidence of like, yeah, nothing looks off here. Let's give it a go. Or, hey, you know, consider X, Y, and Z first.
Yeah, and looking at your second comment there, John, it seems like you may be a little bit more focused on the sales velocity side of things.
Exactly.
With so many sellers on that listing, there will be downward pressure on the buy box. So it'll likely be below the optimal price that Maven would find. So in that case, I would recommend the buy box strategy just to kind of double down on velocity, making sure that you are in line with those other competitors, just with there being so much competition on that listing there.
Yeah. Especially with the volume you're moving, buy box targeting strategy is probably your best bet. Because you most likely will have a pullback in velocity and an increase in profit margin. But at that volume, it may not necessarily be worth it with that number of competition like Casey was talking about. Let's see. I'm setting up the process, or I'm in the process of setting up subscribe and save. Is there anything I should look out for with Aura while that gets implemented? So no, we don't really support subscribe and save specifically. So nothing you need to do in your Aura account. That should be pretty hands off. See, okay, cool. That is basically what we're doing now. We have a different strat for those listings. Perfect. Exactly the way it's really nice to use strategies to create groups of listings. Even if the strategy is the exact same, it's a nice kind of tagging system to a certain degree, right? And so I kind of think of all your listings in different buckets, and then each bucket gets its own strategy, because the listing could move from bucket 1 to bucket 2, and that's basically just a different strategy. That could be as simple as how you're repricing, so Maven, you know, rule based, or it could be you're willing to take a little bit less of a minimum, or you need a higher minimum because the profit margin is so much higher, and you don't want such a low minimum there. So it's a good thing that you're already kind of doing this. So that's awesome. And if you haven't, by the way, anybody on here, I know, Magali, you're 10 days in. If you haven't done an onboarding session, please do schedule one. They're 20 minutes. Just reach out to support and say, hey, I want to schedule an onboarding session. Again, it's 20 minutes. We don't charge for it. It's completely free. Even if you're in a trial, like you should, I more so urge you, if you're in a trial, to get one of these, because we'll share the screen in your account, answer any questions you have, walk you through all the different things. And then if it's recommended that you create certain strategies, or you need help creating certain strategies, we'll do that in your account with you. And so you don't leave with a laundry list of next actions and notes to go implement. We just did it in real time with you. So you kind of leave in a better state, which is great. See, I did one on board, but I need more. More Finn. That's never a bad thing. Yeah. So in that case, yeah, Finn was awesome. Love to hear that. Love to hear that. In that case, beat up support. I say this in a friendly way, but listen, we truly are here to support our users, or potential users. Whatever you need help with, whatever, even small questions. I mean, we have people that jump in daily just with like little ideas. They're like, hey, I just had this random thought. Can I run it by you? Yeah, absolutely. And what's nice is like, we're actually having a real conversation. You're not just sending a message into the void to get a response 8 hours later. So like we can have real conversations, which is nice. So Cool. Well, listen, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you guys for coming. Again, we do this every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST, live office hours. Share it with your friends. Let them know, hey, the guys over at Aura are doing this for free. Go ask any questions you have, even if you're not an Aura user, even better. Like, I want to answer all the questions. But with that, Casey, any last comments from you?
No, Magali, just to answer your last question, Aura won't issue updates for any listing that doesn't have fulfillable units. So you can assign that strategy right when you create the listing. And then once it becomes fulfillable, those updates will start to be sent out. But yeah, thanks as always for everyone jumping in. Great session today. We'll see you next weekend. If you are in the Southeast in Florida, like Dylan and Magali, stay safe with the hurricane coming in. Be smart, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.